Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining our program. This program is managed, which is mainly a book review, basically, on Fatima, daughter of Muhammad. It's programmed and managed at MIT as part of the Shi'i group. What we're gonna do, we're gonna start with around 10-15 minutes introduction, then maybe 40-minute presentation by Professor Clohessy, and then we leave it more really to a dialogue and discussion and hearing opinions, our different opinions on that. So Dr. Al-Qudusi is all yours. If I miss anything, you please point it out. Other than that, thank you so much for joining these sessions, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. Salam alaikum, Dr. Musala. Salam alaikum, or peace be on you. Dr. Clohessy, I'm very happy we have you here. I mean, we all benefited really from your books, and so we have to have you here. If I can share, yeah, I have the ability to share the screen. So I'm going to have some brief introduction, inshallah, using the PowerPoint slides, a meeting about kind of book review, discussion, or dialogue with Professor Christopher Paul Clohessy. I don't know which title he prefers. I like father because he's a priest, he's a doctorate, and he's a professor lecturer at the University at Rome. So you have all the three titles. We are really honored and happy to have him here. And you know, although it's a little bit past, we had the occasion of Christmas, and a few 10 days ago, occasion of the birthday of Lady Fatima. So it's kind of still in the season. Look, I start this meeting with the blessing of these verses, which in Shia traditions believe revealed for the occasion of the birth of Hazrat Fatima. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أتيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. I mean, it traditionally is understood Kawthar refers to Hazrat Fatima, or it's one of its meanings. You know, to introducing Father and Dr. Clohessy. Dr. Clohessy, he's a South African Catholic priest who has a BSc from the Pontifical Urbanianum University in Rome and a PhD from Pontifical Institute for Arabic and Islamic Study, PISAI, also in Rome. Two of his recent books, which was published for Gorgias Press, the first one, the book under our discussion, Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, and the second one, Half of My Heart, which is about Lady Zainab, led to his being named a distinguished scholar of Shiite Studies, Islamic Republic, Iran, 28 World Book Award. He won the book award of that year, 2020. He's at present a resident faculty member of PASAI and his alma mater, lecturing there in Shia Islamic Studies and Quran, Islamic ethics, and a visiting lecturer also at the Pontifical Beda College in Rome, where he lectures in fundamental theology, ecclesiology, and Mariology. So it's interesting. In one of the universities, he's teaching about Islam and maybe focus of also Shi'i Islam and maybe the prominent ladies in the Shi'i Islam. The other school he teaches also including about Hazrat Maryam. His latest book, Angels Hastening the Karbala Dreams, was published by the Gorgias Press in November 2021. I mean, to see the books, the Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, the first edition came out 2009. As he may explain, there wasn't any monograph, any book on the Hazrat Fatima in English. I'm not sure other European languages. There were some works maybe 100 years ago by Father Laminus or other ones, but there was no work. This is very comprehensive work by him. And then the second edition came out 2019, which is based off our discussions based on that. But his two other books, Half of My Heart is about the narratives of Hazrat Zainab, daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which came out in 2020. And then the other book, Angels Hastening the Karbala Dreams, which related, I think, to events of Karbala, is published in 2021. As Dr. Musala referred, I just put the slides. We had a series of discussion in Farsi regarding the book by Dr. Clohessy, and we are very delighted to have him here. So I kind of, for now, in this introduction, I mean, the lecture slide for the introduction, and I want to start to interview or talking with Dr. Clohessy. Dr. Clohessy, you are a man of faith, and somehow I'm interested more about your upbringing and education in South Africa. I mean, your childhood, your high school years, and how you decided, what was the call, when was the call in you, how you decided to joining the clergy, become man of faith, in an age which is getting more and more secular. So that really this feeling, how developing you, that's where we are interested in it. If it's okay for you, talking about those personal matters for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always delightful for me to be amongst friends and also to talk about Lady Fatima, to whom I have great devotion. All of my titles are meaningless. I really do consider, as I get older, and I am getting older now, I consider myself a student of the Ahlul Bayt. So I am quite happy to sit and learn from those who have more than me, in that you have a life experience besides the book knowledge. My knowledge is purely academic, but you have the life experience, and therefore I'm quite delighted to be able to learn. Yes, I am a South African. I grew up during the apartheid era, but was also working in South Africa when apartheid fell and Mandela was elected. But I cannot remember a time when I did not want to serve God in some way. I grew up going to church and from an early age believing in God and never doubting. And as I grew older, I was more and more convinced that I would like to devote my life to the service of God as best I could. And for me, that was in the priesthood. So I studied in South Africa for the priesthood, was ordained a priest in 1988, and then I worked in a number of communities, and it was there in those communities that I first encountered Islam, in that many of my assignments, my pastoral assignments, were in strongly Islamic-dominated communities where all of the members of my own parish church community had family members who had converted to Islam, so that there was an intimate connection. And I was convinced from the beginning that we can't simply cut people out because their faith experience is different, that the children of my own parishioners, even if they were Muslim, were still the children of my parishioners, and therefore, in a sense, part of my wider community. So I was convinced quite young, I mean, early in the priesthood, that Islam is something that needs to be understood, but not just in polemics, because polemics is not a very good route to go. I wanted an academic understanding of Islam, which included a commitment to learning Arabic, which I had to do in order to understand Islam. And because I think it's very important for us non-Muslim scholars that we easily look for similarities. And in that sense, Western scholars of Islam are inclined to create an Islam that is user-friendly, that suits our needs and our purposes. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in knowing what Islam believes about Islam. And in order to do that, one has to read the primary sources, well, primarily the Holy Quran, but also the other primary sources of Islam, so that my knowledge is not my interpretation of Islam, but what Islam in fact says about itself. And it was in South Africa that I first developed this interest, and then it developed from there.
Thank you. Maybe we want to go further, but so that's interesting. So you didn't, so your family have anybody else have joined the rank of clergy, or you were the first in your family joining the rank of clergy? Because I feel it's not an easy decision in this modern. I mean, I understand what you mean. You always felt that. So that's interesting. That's I mean, this is a question sometimes we have as a parents for our children. We want them to be. I think if you are religious, we want to be the religious, and we don't have any appeal to give them, to be sure. So I'm interested. So none of those dots, no. I mean, you said it, but so just curiosity, because this is the common between the Muslim clergy, and it's not an easy life, I think, in a sense. So I'm sorry if you can explain these parts. I will be thankful very much.
Well, so I was the only one in my family to enter the priesthood, and yes, any form of service of a religious community, service of God by serving a religious community is always a vocation. It's not a job. It's a lifestyle, and it's a calling. And one has to be willing to abandon and give up all kinds of perfectly good and legitimate things. So, for example, Catholic priests like myself, we do not marry. Now, it's not because we're against marriage. Marriage is a beautiful gift from God. And God willing, many people should marry, otherwise the world would not be populated and we wouldn't have healthy families. But one of the choices we make is to give up marriage in order to dedicate ourselves entirely to God and to the community we serve without any other distractions. And I know that in Islam there's a particular view of marriage which makes this a little more difficult to understand, but growing up in the Catholic faith, it was perfectly natural for me that this would be one of the sacrifices, and we knew what it was going to be. We knew the sacrifices. Nobody tried to fool us. And so it really is meant to be a calling that one pours one's whole life into.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I appreciate we discuss. So I'm thinking maybe because you kind of get through it, that knowing Muslim community and your pastoral duties go to knowing Muslims and interacting with them. So maybe if we can, it's a good time we start the whole presentation that how you got involved with the writing this book or studying Islam or writing this book. What is your motivation and what you want to say in the book? So the introductory lecture by you, and then we can have any other questions or other stuff, maybe comments. I put it after your lecture. It's your discretion how long you want to discuss about the whole background, the detail of the book, concept, chapters of it. And I can show the chapters to people, but I think it takes a while, and some of people that attend the lectures are familiar. So I put it during the discussion, maybe some more specific sections of the book. And we had a summary on the Telegram which mentioned the chapters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll say a few words about the origins of this book, and then I thought to say a few words about a comparative theology between Lady Fatima as she's understood specifically in Shi'i Islam, not in Sunni Islam, but in Shi'i Islam, and the person of Lady Mary as she is understood specifically in Catholic Christianity, but not in Protestant Christianity. There is a great difference. So I decided to do a master's degree in Islamic studies. I went to Cairo to learn Arabic. I began learning Arabic there. Then I went to Italy, to the college where I'm now a member, to continue with Arabic and to do a master's in Islamic theology. During the course of that, we did a brief course on Shi'i Islam, and I was absolutely transfixed by the story of Karbala. I can remember sitting in class and thinking, I'm going to spend the rest of my life looking at this battle, because there's something here that just grips my attention. And so, having finished the master's, I decided to do a doctorate, and I decided to do a Christian theological examination of Al-Hussein. In other words, the vision of Al-Hussein through Christian eyes. But of course, the moment I began to study Al-Hussein, I came across Lady Fatima. And I was quite shocked back then, and this was in the early 2000s, I was quite shocked that I could find hardly any solid academic literature about her. Now, there were certainly pamphlets in Arabic and in Farsi and in Urdu, and there was some work by the Orientalists like Massignon. There was also work by the one you mentioned, Henri Lamens, whose work is terrible. He's extremely anti-Shia, and he denigrated and mocked the character of Lady Fatima. And I decided that I would not only produce the first academic biography of Lady Fatima based only on Arabic sources, but that I would always also find a way of arguing against what Lamens had insisted, that she was not important, basically, and I simply repeat what he said. He said Lady Fatima was a nuisance to her father, and he married her to Ali to get rid of her, to get her out of the house. And I thought, no, this doesn't sound correct at all. And in fact, I think in my book, I have shown that Lamens was completely incorrect in his interpretations, not only about Lady Fatima, but even later on about Lady Zainab. So I'm happy to say that having finished this work on Lady Fatima, I produced a second edition, and I hope to produce a third, because there are some things in the book now that I now disagree with myself. And I think, no, I was hasty in a particular judgment or in a particular fact, and I want to revisit it. So I hope to produce another book on Lady Fatima covering a little more the end of the Prophet's life and the end of her life too, and the terrible disputes, but also some of the other things that went on. So since then, of course, I've written on Lady Zainab, to whom I also have great devotion, and the Dreams of Karbala. And I'm happy to say my latest book is about to be published on Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas, about whom, again, there is great devotion, but very little written because the sources are so few. So all of this for me is a wonderful thing. And then perhaps after that, Fatima al-Masuma, whose shrine I visited in Qum a few weeks ago, and I thought perhaps I would like to write about her. So that's how it all came about. I now in Rome teach specifically Shi'i theology and Shi'i texts to my students. In my final year students, we look at Dua Kumail, we look at some of the ziyarat, especially the Ashura ziyarah in the Arabic versions, and we go through them looking at the theology together. So I thoroughly enjoy my work, and it helps me in my own spirituality a great deal. I thought just for a few moments, I would say a few words about these two extraordinary women, because there are possible parallels between the person of Fatima, Lady Fatima, and I always have great love and respect for her, but I don't repeat always the usual words of respect, because otherwise it takes a great deal of extra time. But I have great love and respect for Lady Fatima. Between Lady Fatima, as she's understood in Shi'i theology and spirituality, and Lady Mary, not in the Quran, but as she's understood specifically in Catholic theology. Now, generally speaking, in the field of comparative religion or in the field of Catholic-Muslim dialogue, the two Maryams are compared. Maryam in the Quran, specifically Surat Al-Imran and Surat Maryam, and then Mary as she's understood generally in Christianity. And those are very interesting parallels. But I think there are stronger parallels in terms of Lady Fatima in Shia theology and Mary in Roman Catholic theology. And that these comparisons that I make and these analogies that I draw, they are perfectly valid. They don't have to be incontestable, but they are perfectly valid without allowing the two figures to merge into one. Because one of the great dangers for me in interreligious dialogue, especially the Shia Catholic dialogue, is that we are inclined to merge figures, Hussein and Jesus, Mary and Fatima. That's a very dangerous theology. Al-Hussein is not Isa. He is Al-Hussein, and he is a unique individual, etc., etc. And it's the same with Maryam and Fatima. But there are a number of teachings in Catholic theology about Mary that echo and resonate very profoundly in the life of Lady Fatima. And I thought quickly tonight we'd look at 5 of those, although there are probably others. The first is that one of the major Catholic teachings about Mary is the teaching of the Immaculate Conception. That is, that Mary, the only human being to experience this, Mary was at the instant of her conception set free by God from sin. That sin that Christianity calls original sin, the sin that we are born with, that stain of sin from Adam. I know that in Islam there is no concept of original sin, but there are hints at something. We'll look at that now. So in Catholic understanding, the Immaculate Conception is a diachronic act. In other words, it stretches backwards and even forwards in time, as does Karbala. Karbala stretches backwards and it stretches forwards. And so that for Christians and for Catholics, the merits of the death of Jesus on the cross are taken by God and applied in retrospect to the birth of his own mother, so that the woman who carries Jesus would be pure, free from all sin. Now, the Islamic texts certainly contain hints, firstly, of a very special status for Maryam in Surat Al-Imran particularly. So while Maryam is still in the womb, she is consecrated. In verse 35 of that Surah Al-Imran, she is consecrated to God by her mother, who begs protection for her and for her offspring, that is Isa. And we're told that God accepts this prayer. He accepts her with full acceptance. providing this child when she's born with miraculous food. And then, most important, that threefold use of a verb, that he chose her and purified her and chose her above all women, the same root in all three of those Arabic verbs. So for me, already there is a hint in Islamic theology, Quranic theology, of some sort of status for Lady Maryam that may not be an immaculate conception, but that sets her apart. As the Quran itself says, she is above all other women, which means she's different from all other women. There is that famous hadith. It is carried by Al-Bukhari. Unfortunately, I know in Shia circles, it's transmitted by Abu Huraira. And I know that Abu Huraira is problematic. I've learned this through bad experience in Shia circles. Nonetheless, that famous hadith of the children born of Adam, Satan touches all of them except for Maryam and her son. Now, this is da'if. This hadith is not a strong hadith, but it is an interesting text nonetheless, because wherever this hadith had its origins, there's again the suggestion that Maryam has a specific status. When we turn to Lady Fatima, it is far clearer, because now you're dealing with the virtue of isma. She is ma'soom. It's very hard for me as a non-Arabist to precisely translate ma'soom, not because I don't know what it means, but because it has a theological content that is very important. Is that she is sinless? Is it that is impeccable? Is it that she cannot make a mistake, that she is infallible? Is it a mixture of all of those things? Whatever it is, she shares in this inviolability, if you like, with the other members of the Ahl Bayt, with the imams that spring from the core members of the Ahl Bayt. I know that the fifth imam, Imam al-Baqir, when he was building the theology of Isma, he built it around Surah Al-Ahzab 33. That is Fatima, and then Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, that is Maryam. It was around these two women that he began to construct this theology of sinlessness, of freedom from error, of an immunity from doing what is wrong. It's hard to precise the timing of this gift from God. Is it given to Lady Maryam and Lady Fatima at the instant of their conception or at the instant of their birth? But that's not important now. The fact is that in the case of Lady Fatima, and I think I mentioned it in this book, the clue lies in the hadith surrounding her naming, that she is given the name Fatima because of what God has already done for her. She has been separated or weaned, Fâṭima, from the fire, from evil, from shirk, and from some of the problem of menstruation. Of course, this is also a big issue. So that before she is born, already, Lady Fatima's purification is both physical and spiritual, and it is accomplished by God. So that first issue, for me, there are strong hints between Lady Fatima and Maryam, but also Maryam in the Quran and Maryam in Catholic theology, of a specific status that is not given to any other woman. The second topic that I covered at length in the book was the question of virginity, because virginity is an important thing in all the monotheistic religions. Our Lady Maryam in the Quran is a virgin. She's Batul, or Adra, more frequently Batul, I think is the Arabic term. And Fatima too is known as the Virgin. But of course, it has to be with Lady Fatima a different concept of virginity. So in the case of Maryam in the Quran, we know for certain that she is a virgin when she conceives and gives birth to Isa. But what happens after that, the text of Quran doesn't tell us. Whereas in Catholic theology, she is a virgin before and after and remains perpetually a virgin. But the virginity of Lady Maryam in the Quran and Mary in Catholic teaching is a physical virginity, which has implications for purity, but it is primarily a physical virginity. Whereas Lady Fatima's can't be that, because she gives birth to Al-Hassan, Al-Hussein, Lady Zainab, and loses a child as well. So she is a fully fledged wife and mother. Now, I think it's quite clear that with respect to Lady Fatima, everything that is said of Maryam must also be able to be said of her. That Maryam, like Fatima, like Maryam, is virgin and intercessor, or virgin and mother. So there seems to me, and this is my own opinion, there seems to me a paralleling, deliberate paralleling of Lady Fatima and Maryam, in that Fatima is greater. She is part of the Prophet. She is not just the mother of a prophet, she is a part of the Prophet Muhammad. And in this sense, it lifts her above Lady Maryam. It's very interesting. There's that famous hadith about the 4 women who are of paradise and who they are. And the names change depending on which book. And I looked at the Sunni texts especially. The names range between Khadija and Maryam and Fatima and Sarah and others. So there's a constant shifting. And sometimes Fatima is in first place and sometimes in second or in third place. But it seems clear to me in Shia understanding that Fatima is greater than Maryam, in that she is a piece of the Prophet. And that gives her a specific distinction that Lady Maryam doesn't have. And her virginity seems to me to be a spiritual virginity rather than a physical virginity, that it has to do with God purifying her. I know that in some cases it is said that she does not bleed as women do, that this is removed from her by a supernatural intervention by God. And I suspect that the texts that I read certainly seem to point to that being the key issue with her. So again, you have, for me, a second parallel. You have this special status of purity. Secondly, you have the question of all of them are called virgin, even though they're also mothers. At the same time, they are virgins. And motherhood, thirdly, is crucial, both in Mary in Catholic theology and in Lady Fatima, because around the birth of Jesus, and we've just celebrated in the Christmas story, and around the birth of Al-Hussein, there is all of this angelic activity, quite important angelic activity, but also there are cosmic reactions to these 2 exceptional births. There is, for example, a heavenly announcing of this birth. In the Arabic text, and this was part of the thrust of the book on the Karbala dreams, in the Arabic texts, the annunciation of Al-Hussein's birth is most often made not to Fatima, but to his grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad. He is the one who is told that his daughter, Lady Fatima, will give birth to this son. And there's some marvelous Arabic texts of Jibreel literally throwing himself down to earth and then racing back to heaven 3 times to try and persuade the Prophet that this son is going to be born. The Prophet saying, I don't need a son who's going to be killed by my community. And Jibreel is determined that the message has to be made known. And so it is to, most especially to the Prophet, that Jibreel makes the announcement of the birth of a grandson, whereas in Catholic theology it is, and in the Quran, in terms of Isa, it is specifically to Lady Maryam that this heavenly visitor, Gabriel, makes this extraordinary announcement. Although in the Quran, the story changes, because at times the announcement appears to be made by a group of angels in Surah Al-Imran, rather than one single heavenly visitor. Nonetheless, it is a heavenly annunciation. But of course, these annunciations of birth are blended with terrible warnings about future events. So Mary, as she holds in her arms the child in the temple to consecrate him, she is warned that a sword is going to pierce her soul, that something terrible is going to happen. And Jibreel, in telling the Prophet that he is going to have a grandson, also tells him that he is going to be killed by Muhammad's own ummah. His own community after him is going to end up killing this child. And so these forewarnings are articulated in the case of Jesus and Mary in Catholicism a little later, in the case of Jibril and the Prophet, even before the birth of Al-Hussein, his death is being predicted and forewarned. There are also cosmic reactions to these births, although moderately different. In the case of Jesus, there is a rejoicing of the whole of heaven that is articulated by groups of angels singing and proclaiming the news of the birth of this child and inviting an outpouring of joy. At the birth of Al-Hussein, there are a number of texts that depict joy among the angels, the people of paradise, and the inhabitants of the earth, whose even the people in the fire, their punishment in some of the texts anyway, some of the more esoteric texts, their punishment is lightened at the moment as a way of rejoicing in the birth of Al-Hussein. The point being that however we understand these texts, there is a cosmic reaction to these two births. And of course, both Mary and Lady Fatima give birth under very testing circumstances. So in the Quran, we know already that Lady Maryam lamented what she was experiencing. Would that I had not been born. In the Bible story, of course, Joseph and Mary struggle to find a place, and Jesus eventually is born in a shelter for animals. And in Fatima's case, according to some texts at least, her struggle is psychological, giving birth to a son who has been predicted to be martyred, to be killed, not by anybody, by his own community. And the Shia texts use Quranic wording to describe how she gives birth with reluctance. It's from chapter 46 of the Quran, and the texts say that Lady Fatima is going to give birth and gives birth with reluctance. I mean, that's not the best translation. It's one of the translations given by, I think, Pictal in his translation. And both of these births are, in a sense, overshadowed by a feeling of doom. In the case of Lady Fatima, even as she's giving birth, the future martyrdom. In the case of Lady Maryam, Lady Mary in the Bible, it's a later prediction when the child is still a child that he's going to be killed. Both of these mothers are also sorrowful women. And I know that the question of sorrow and grief is exceptionally important in Shia piety and spirituality. And it's not a meaningless grief. It is not a grief for the sake of grief. It has a profound reason behind it. But here you could almost collapse these two figures into one, Mary in Catholicism and Fatima, because they are both profoundly sorrowful women. And what binds them together and joins them together is this image of the mother of sorrows, or the mistress of sorrows. So in Shia Islam, Lady Fatima is the mistress of the Beit al-Ahzan, the house of sorrows, the house of sadness. In Catholic theology, Mary is known as the mother of sorrows, or Our Lady of Sorrows, grieving mothers whose life appears to be quite short and hard, but is made even harder by the foreknowledge of what's going to happen to their sons. So Lady Fatima, of course, is already long dead by the time that Al-Hussein is killed at Karbala, but Mary was not. Mary was alive at the time of the death, the martyrdom of Jesus, and was a witness to it. So while Lady Fatima looks on from the afterlife, from the barrier, or wherever she is, or at that time, Lady Mary in the Bible is there, standing present at the death of her son. So you have two women who are mothers of sons who are going to be martyred, not just giving their lives, but more especially for me, having their lives forcibly taken from them by others acting unjustly, so that each of them is regarded in his own unique way as a martyr. And the theme of martyrdom is as strong in Christianity as it is in Islam. It is a very important issue, and one that shouldn't be spoken about lightly, because martyrdom, well, God calls people to that. That's not something we choose. I think God calls his martyrs and knows who they are. Lady Fatima knows even before her son is born that he's going to be a martyr, so that her sorrow is there from the beginning. She gives birth in sorrow. Mary's knowledge comes later of the death of her son, when there's a political agitation to bring his life to an end. But I think that her sorrow begins earlier. I think that her sorrow begins in the difficulty of the circumstances in which she gives birth to Jesus. And then if you read the text of the New Testament, the Lucan text, his birth is followed by a string of appalling events. Herod's murder of countless children, then they're being forced into exile in Egypt, then the loss of Jesus for a while in the temple, they couldn't find him. And so you have this similarity between the two women, that one is present at her son's death and the other is not physically present. But at the same time, you have this, they almost collapse into one of these two women of extraordinary sorrow who see their sons martyred, their lives taken unjustly, most often for political purpose. It was political connivance and political subterfuge, in a sense, that took the life of Al-Hussein and took the life of Jesus. And I suppose, finally, on these two women, both of them have powerful intercessory prerogatives. And it was a chapter in the book of Fatima, Lady Fatima, that I thought very important, because Lady Fatima's intercession is somewhat different from Mary's intercession. So in Catholic theology, Mary's intercession depends on two things. It depends firstly on her son, who permits her to intercede, but it also depends on human repentance, that in order to win intercession, we must repent of our sins and be sorrowful. In a sense, Lady Fatima's intercession is the same. Her intercession is by bidnillah, of course, by the will of God. This is not a question. And I know that there is a great disparity between the theologies of Shi'i Islam and Sunni Islam about the possibility of intercession, and more than that, whether it actually exists. Quite clearly in Shi'i Islam, it's not an issue that whether it exists or not. It is an important part of Shi'i theology. But Lady Fatima, and the Imams too, but especially Lady Fatima, of course, she intercedes because of her standing and her status before God, but only by his permission. This is absolutely clear that God permits it, like Mary. But also, her intercession is exercised in a different way. And I was profoundly moved by this, that she intercedes for her adherents, the Shia, the members, those who love Al-Hussein and love her. But she intercedes also for non-Shia who love her and who honor her. It gives me great hope. It really does, because what we need people to pray for us and intercede for us. Really, we do. It's a serious issue that we depend, many of us, on the prayers of others. People say, I'll pray for you, I'll make dua for you. I take those things very seriously. But the thought that these two extraordinary women are going to make intercession, that for me is, at the most crucial instant of our lives, that is the moment of death, that for me is very, very important. In Lady Fatima's case, it is on the day of Yawm ad-Din that she is going to make this intercession and lead her faithful into paradise. In the famous Catholic prayer to Our Lady, to Mary, it's always pray for us now, but especially at the hour of our death. That is when we most need prayer. So, and Fatima has an intercession also, which I call a negative intercession, that she prays God to punish the killers of her son. This is not an element you find in the intercession of Mary in Catholicism, but in the Shia texts, it's very clear that Lady Fatima wants justice done, and she kneels, or she holds before God this shirt, this torn, bloodied shirt of Al-Hussein, and asks that justice be done. There is a hint of this in the New Testament book of Revelation, where the saints intercede before God and say, how long before you punish those who killed us? And God's answer to them is that they have to wait and be patient, because his time, his hour will come. So I certainly wrote this book to defend, first of all, to defend Lady Fatima against a fellow priest, because Lamans was a Catholic priest like me. And he was a very good scholar. But for some reason, he was extremely anti-Shia and very much in favor of Sunni. And he rejected the whole question of Ahlul Bayt. He rejected the claims of Ali bin Abi Talib, and he rejected Lady Fatima and suggested she played no role at all in the beginnings of historical Islam, which I quite clearly showed was not true. I also wrote the book because I wanted to show quite clearly that Fatima is not a Shi'i invention. And I did the same for Lady Zainab, and I did the same for Abbas, Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas. People among the Shia often criticize me because I use so many Sunni sources. I use the Sunni sources to show that these characters, Lady Fatima, is exceptionally strong in the Sunni books of Hadith. One just has to look for her, and she's there. She's not a neglected figure. The most important Hadith about Lady Fatima are found in all the major Sunni works, which means she's not an invention of Shia piety or Shi'i theology. She is, in reality, everything that is claimed about her. The last surviving daughter of the Prophet, but also a young woman who played an exceptionally important role in her father's life, especially in his last years. So, and then finally, I also added a chapter suggesting that for the sake of interreligious dialogue, for the possible theological dialogue, we could talk about similarities between Lady Fatima and Mary. There's one last point that I would make. One of the things that I came across, of course, was this ongoing debate in Islam, in Shi'i Islam, between those who, in a sense, maybe like Shariati, maybe. Those who want to update and modernize Lady Fatima, those who want her to be a model of the contemporary woman striving for justice and liberation, and who would prefer that we remove the supernatural elements, because the supernatural elements, in a sense, cut people off from imitation. I can't possibly imitate Lady Fatima if she is so blessed by God in a way that I could never be blessed. So I think that you have this debate that's been going on. Fadlallah, I think, was one of those who pushed hard, I think, for the more modern vision of Lady Fatima, whereas others were saying, no, if you lose the supernatural elements, then you diminish her character. The supernatural elements are not magical. They are part of God's plan, part of what God intended for her, and they form part of her personal history. However, you could use Lady Fatima now in contemporary times still as a contemporary model for justice. So I said the same about Lady Zainab, that one of the extraordinary things about both these women, Lady Fatima and Lady Zainab, is their practice of virtues that we always thought were male virtues. They're not male virtues. Courage, for example, fighting for justice. These are not male virtues. They're human virtues. And they are exceptionally well articulated and well modeled by Lady Fatima, especially in the appalling circumstances after the death of her father, when she is already beyond this world with grief. She's almost already got a foot in the next world. She's so sorrowful. And then all of the political intrigue that does such damage to her, not just the rejection of her husband, but also the terrible issues surrounding the election of the new caliph and the demand for allegiance and a physical attack that injures her. So she is a woman who is extraordinarily ill-treated, and yet she campaigns and fights for the rights of her husband. Even after the death of her father, when she's already weak and struggling, she goes out to speak for Ali and campaign for Ali, because she understands justice, that justice needs to be done. It's not just something we believe in, it's something we're meant to do. And therefore, for me, and one of the reasons why I have devotion to her myself, and why I wrote this book specifically for Christians to read about who this Lady Fatima is because I think that she remains a very good contemporary model in the struggle for justice, because everybody has to be part of that struggle. We can't leave it to a small group. Now, I know that I read a text recently by Jafar Sadiq talking about forbidding the wrong and enjoining the good, where he speaks about this is a particular group in the community. It's not given to everybody. But in terms of the struggle for justice, we have to fight for justice in our own lives, our own marriages, our own families, our own communities. And for me, Lady Fatima is a perfect model of this. And as is Lady Zainab, as is Al-Abbas. And so as a Christian theologian, I recognize these as universal models, not not bound by one particular religious tradition or one particular family, but raised up by God for the universe, for the world, as models of what justice, what submission to God's law, what obedience to God is. And it was a great pleasure researching this book. And I really do hope to publish more on Lady Fatima, who was my first love, truly, in the academic world. More than anyone else, she was the one who attracted my attention. So there are things that I want to write about her still. I'm going to end there. I've spoken for 40 minutes, too long probably.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was excellent summary. I will say first, you covered the topic, the chapter which we didn't specifically cover. Actually, we had this series of discussion of two ladies. I started with Hazrat Maryam, and exactly I went the comparison you said between Quranic picture of Hazrat Maryam and the Bible. And also, during these lectures, I use your chapter about Mary in Catholic Theology. That was the first 10 part. And then the second part, which we discussed about specifically from your book, but Hazrat Fatima, we didn't cover this section you summarized, exactly the comparison, although we can discuss more. And also in your discussion, you touched a couple of very important things, and many of the chapters. Really, it was a great summary. I was debating. So I honestly, I have to let other people ask questions, and I want people raise their hands or write your question. I will ask it. But kind of in continuation, where you at, and this is my kind of use my privilege. I was my question. I will come to this debate you refer to about the role modelness of these two ladies, and the thing you said about Dr. Shariati or Late Fazlullah, which it was as you're right, it was the biggest theological debate I think in the last 20, 30 years among Shia theologians, both Lebanese, both great scholars, Sayyid Jafar Murtaza and Fazlullah. When I give one other dimension to it too, the easier one I said first, and then the one you referred to, which is a more challenging one, I will give a quote. Look, first is this. We all, as I said, we are all both, you as a Catholic, we as Shia Muslim, we have sense of religious feeling, man of faith. The values the world is selling to us is now as more gets secular and secular, and especially when differences regarding women. The picture of Mary and Fatima as chaste, pure women is contradicted at what is nowadays selling to us. And enforcing, and so what is a good woman? I mean, kind of now the good woman is, sorry, to quote, promiscuous woman or bold one. So this part I want you explain, because this is a problem as you as your shepherd of your community, you talk with them, pastor. I like to know what your experience is. What is your Catholic talking about? We have the same too. What is the function of womanist? But specifically regarding to Hazrat Fatima, if I can share something, I can, exactly that discussion. The Shariati wants to present as Lady Fatima as a model, as a mother model. So completely neglect all those supernatural metaphysical features. Fazlullah, Allama Fazlullah ibn Fazlullah, which is very great scholar, very brave scholar, saying his opinion. Maybe it's think of unity with Ahl Sunnah, partially other things. Doesn't reject that, doesn't completely ignore, but start to poke to some of those metaphysical one, and that produce a debate. But I think there is a thesis, which let me share it with you guys if I can. I'm sorry. Let me close this first, find the file, and then I'll share. Yeah, I find it. So I can hopefully share it with you guys. Look, this is a thesis, which PhD thesis, which one of the students of Dr. Modarresi in Princeton has done. Do you see this picture? I think
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I want you maybe regarding his conclusion. His name is sorry, I forgot. Dennis El Sufi. I think he finished it some late 1990s. With Dr. Hussein Modarresi from Princeton. And then he said, this dissertation draws two conclusions. For Sunnis, Fatima is often portrayed as ordinary pious Muslim woman, but she occasionally rises to ranks of sainthood, which you also touched that, and True. But then says for Shia Muslims, Fatima role as feminine counterpart to Imams creates a woman, displays the characteristics of the ideal Muslim woman, which is true. But this but it changes it, in a way that makes her further out of reach as a role model for Muslim women that the Imams are for Muslim men. So she thinks the way that Hazrat Fatima has this image in Shia tradition makes her less be a role model in daily life than maybe imams are for men. I think you touched this, but if you can elaborate on this, I will be thankful. And I add one point related to your book. Look, as you said, these two Lady Fatima is an example of fighting for justice. These two ladies, besides have these virtues, which supernatural qualities, we say they're very like in the modern world, educated owners of wisdom. You see it for Lady Mary in the Magnificat in the Bible, which I think Gospel of Luke mentions, and that's the only place she talks. But you look that few paragraphs, you know we're dealing with a lady which is really educated, talented, smart in any secular way judging. Regarding Lady Fatima, we have different sources, but the one also you mentioned it in your book, in the appendix, is the Khutbah Fadakiyya. So also I wanted you mention this part and playing this regarding this issue, role modelship and the supernatural qualities, and also that first question about her as a role model for this secularized world. I'm very thankful. So I stop sharing and let you. Yeah.
So thank you. It is an interesting question because, of course, to have somebody as a role model does not mean that I am attempting to become a carbon copy of that person. That's not what role model means. So for one thing, you and I are living in not an ordinary world because we have embraced faith. We have chosen to submit our lives to a God who cannot be seen, but who we believe in by faith in his revelation. We are immediately plunging ourselves into something above the natural world. We are already, you and I, in a sense, living our lives in a supernatural surrounding because we have decided, gift of God is faith, but we have decided to submit to him and to obey his commandments, which are supernatural. They are given us from God, from heaven, to obey his laws, so that our lives are not just ordinary secular lives. They are ordinary lives, but lived in the supernatural milieu, if you like. So I'm never keen that people make this distinction between the world and the supernatural. No, these two things are, God has sent his revelation into our world in a way that can be understood, it can be heard, or it can be read. And therefore, the supernatural has penetrated into the natural world in a sense. And we are, you and I, by attempting to, even when you recite Quran, you are immersing yourself in God's own word. You are not in an ordinary world at that moment. You are in a supernatural world. So there are a number of people who God has raised up over the centuries in the Catholic Church, great saints, Francis of Assisi, for example, and others. In Islam, Lady Fatima, who God has raised up and gifted for a particular purpose, to serve as models of what human beings are meant to be like, what we're meant to become. We are meant to become practices of the virtues, those who live and practice virtue, because in Catholic understanding, a saint is defined as one who heroically lives virtue. And I think that in a sense you could say the same of Lady Fatima, that she is not just one who is gifted by God. She also had to submit her life. She also had to choose to live the virtues. And that is where my life connects with hers. I understand that God gifts all of us with certain abilities and talents. I understand that. And I understand that we're gifted differently and that I can't be a carbon copy of the person next to me. But I do understand that the virtues are common to all of us. And all of us are meant to choose to live the virtues every day. And Lady Fatima, Lady Zainab, these are people who lived them to a heroic degree. I mean, and all of us are meant to strive for that. Not to be another Lady Fatima, but to be myself, but living the virtues as perfectly as I can. And we're living in a world where where a number of virtues are exceptionally absent. One of them is gratitude, shukr, just the ability to be thankful to God. And the reason that we have materialism and people greedy and wanting more is because we've forgotten to be grateful to God. And in fact, I think it has its root in the word kufr, this lack of gratitude to God for all that he has given. And I think that in these ladies, Fatima and Lady Zainab, you do not see a failing in gratitude for God. And in Hussein especially, you do not see it. Gratitude is missing, so is justice, quite clearly. And justice begins in small ways, each of us taking our stand. Each of us has our Karbala moment, sometimes quite often, where we have to make difficult ethical decisions that frighten us because we don't want to be unpopular or lose friends, but we have to make those decisions. And in those moments, it is people like Lady Fatima, Lady Zainab, some of the great saints of the church that give great strength and courage that it can be done. I can choose to live justly. I don't think we should think for a moment that it was easy for Lady Fatima to be just. No, it was a terrible struggle for her, as it was for Lady Zainab, who stood on the field of Karbala and watched the members of her family being killed one by one. It wasn't an easy thing. She didn't have some special immunity from God that protected her. No, she was a woman who had to choose to take a stand. And I think that that's where they are role models. If I could just add, this is my own opinion. I think that one of the issues about Shariati for me is that, in a sense, he is talking about the journey of Fatima becoming Fatima. Fatima becoming the woman that God created her to be, in a sense. And that's what we're meant to do. It's part of our journey, each of us, our existential journey, that I am created to become the person that God created me to be, that is submitted to him in every respect of my life. That is why he creates me, that one day I may return to him from where I first came. And so I always understood Shariati, either wrongly or rightly, as at least on one level, talking about this existential journey of Fatima becoming the woman that God wants all women to be, or becoming the Muslim that God wants all Muslims to be. Now, that might be a wrong interpretation of Shariati. I've never been a great fan of Shariati, to be honest, because I could never understand his Marxism particularly. Was never sure about how he dealt with that issue. But nonetheless, I mean, I read his work on Lady Fatima, and I read it with that understanding that she is a model of all of us, that we have to strive each day to become the people that God intended us to be when he created us. That was people who are completely, in every aspect, submitted to him.
Thank you. I mean, his book is the one still the most well connected with the youth or modern educated. We have other books, and I think also that many people welcome your book, although it's a little more academic, but it is great because people nowadays want to a little bit different way of presentation. But because there are questions, I mean, just one comment, because I asked, what is your approach or discussion about what is the secular world of media is, because that was my part of question, putting in front of women nowadays, and how is your approach discussion in the church to how to deal with these issues, these challenges of secular, this part, and then we go to the other questions.
I think that the reality is, without being dramatic, we are living in a world that has abandoned God in large proportion. A world that has gone away from God, and that is no longer the world that God intended when he created us. And here in the West, this not just secularism, it's more than that, it's militant secularism. In other words, it's not just people who don't believe in God, it's people who are determined that they're going to force their secularism on everybody. And we see it in the press, especially in some countries where you can't even mention God anymore. But this militant secularism has been developing rapidly from about the 60s, I think. The 60s was the great death of God movement, rise of Marxism, I mean, in the West especially. So we've seen the secularism increase, and the way that it's manifesting now is in the whole transgender debate that we are facing here, and that is becoming a huge problem for us in universities here. And professors are losing their jobs because they refuse to give into the transgender debate. But transgender for me is just another aspect of a world that is determined to abandon everything that God has ever said about any subject. So famously, Catholicism and Islam are held up in the secular world as religions that oppress women. And yet, at the heart of both of these religions, you have these extraordinary women, Fatima and Mary, who are given a status in life that no other human being is given. And furthermore, I can't speak for Islam because I don't have a lived experience, but I can speak for Catholicism. The dignity of woman has always been respected and treasured and protected by the church. It's just that how we understand the dignity of woman has changed so dramatically that it's no longer understood as dignity. So we've changed the content and the meanings of terms so radically now since postmodernism that we don't even know what we want anymore. But we, you and I, we understand what dignity is because it is God-given, and we understand the role and the importance of the woman in the world and in the home and in marriage and in family. And in every respect, I think the church has always tried to promote that and protect it. And I know my own mother as a model of that, and my own sisters, who have lived with a quiet dignity, and I think that's how it was meant to be.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. So there is one person I think raised her hand, but there are a few questions. So I will read first, and then we go to person raised their hand. The first question is this: the range of the name mentioned in this context. Wasn't a question. I'm not pretty sure, but maybe
it is more like
yes.
a comment, I think.
Comment is
Yeah.
comment. So, but I mentioned it just because that person, you mentioned the range of the names. I agree with you. I sometimes also myself, different sources look different names. Three are common. You know that the four best women in the hereafter, one is Mary, one is Hazrat Fatima, one Hazrat Khadija, and then the question is now who is the fourth one? Is it Hazrat Asiya, Sarah, mother of Abraham, or Kulsum, the sister of Musa? So there, the fourth one is sometimes cycling. But let's go at the next question. One finds that the Sunni canon struggle to denigrate or bring down the image of Imam Ali alayhi salam results in applying the same strategy to Lady Fatima alayhi salam, as if to do away with both images in one stroke. Do you think that might be the case? This is that the strategy of denigrating Hazrat Ali was or Hazrat Fatima was both related, or is it not the case? Maybe you say your experience shows.
Now the person who asked question is the one also raised the hand. So
okay, so let him. So
if
Mrs.
you want
Naila,
to discuss it yourself, Naila, please, you can unmute yourself. You can also start your video if you choose to, but we will be happy to hear from you yourself. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Clohessy, Father Clohessy, I have been an admirer for many years. I possess many of your books and look forward to the next one on Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas. This question that I had written earlier is actually, pertains to Imam Ali in a way that is even more significant than how it pertains to Lady Fatima. You know that, there's been a consistent movement, particularly in the earlier part of, the post-messenger period, where Imam Ali needed to be denigrated and brought down several pegs by the academic canon in order to achieve certain ends and to sort of make the picture look the way it needed to look for several expediencies, and we will not go into those. But do you think that in order to achieve that aim, that the same strategy might have been applied also to Lady Fatima's case? I refer particularly to your introduction of this particular book, the one that we are presenting today, and that you in your introduction have mentioned several references of historical traditions that actually can be read as quite problematic. Certainly by the Shia, but also sort of by the general audience. And the fact that these have come down through the historical sort of pipeline is suggestive that Lady Fatima might also have been a victim to those who wanted to bring down Ali's name.
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting question. I think that in part, not just Lady Fatima, I think anyone who was understood as a partisan of Ali was immediately targeted, especially in the early years. So in Ali's case, I mean, it's almost as if in those early years of the first of the three Khalifa, it's almost as though he was written out of history. His name was not used. Children were not named after him. He was denigrated verbally, cursed verbally, as well as Al-Hussein. But of course, that was a political thing. So you have to ask, well, okay, I understand that maybe if I was one of the first three caliphs who felt threatened, I mean, we get a sense in the early. So can I just preface by saying I always read the early Sunni historians, Tabari, for example, Baladri, because they really do recall all kinds of very important information. Sometimes they forget themselves a little bit. I think that Tabari at times forgets himself and is quite sympathetic towards Al-Hussein, and then he remembers who he is and he returns to his theme. But certainly, in the case of Ali, it is a political thing that he is making a specific claim, that claim is not a popular claim, and therefore he is denigrated and written out. I suspect, although this is something that I need to read about a lot more, I suspect that one of the reasons why Lady Fatima was pushed to the side was because she challenged Abu Bakr. You don't challenge the caliph. She challenged Abu Bakr in her famous wasn't really a khutbah, it was really a protest, an ihtijaj, this protest that she makes in the masjid against his leadership and against the betrayal of her father's ideals and her father's intentions. I suspect that may be part of why she gets denigrated and pushed aside, because she made a verbal challenge that hit home seriously hard. I mean, I think later on, even some of the caliphs, I think it might have been Umar, who said we may have made a mistake. We may have acted a little, I think he used the word falter. We made an error. It comes across in Tabari, and everyone just ignores it. No, I think that the caliph realized they'd done something very, very bad. So I certainly think that there's quite clearly a diminishing of the person of Lady Fatima in the Sunni piety and Sunni theology. Whether that's because she's attached to Ali and inseparable from Ali, and therefore she's automatically diminished as he is, or whether it's specifically because she dared to challenge the first leadership after the death of the Prophet, and refused to give allegiance, refused when her house was attacked, they refused to give allegiance, they refused to surrender to popular pressure. It may well have been that, but this is a guess, because these are texts that I need to read more carefully. But I quite agree with you that she has been diminished. And then along comes this early 20th century Belgian Jesuit, who's a very good Islamic scholar, but he is supremely anti-Shia. And I read all his stuff. It was in French. I had to get it translated. I got it translated. I read it. And I could never figure out, why is this man so anti-Ahlul Bayt? What is it? He sounds irritated and annoyed with the Ahlul Bayt. Whereas you get other scholars like Madelung, the famous Professor Madelung, who quite clearly in his work, and this is an Oxford scholar, supports the case of Ali and says Ali was correct historically. So it's a very interesting debate. And I think that probably if you were to poll the majority of Western scholars, they would have to admit that Ali had a claim that Ali was ill-treated and his claim was rejected. And I suspect that partly Fatima, because she's attached to him, is also going to be diminished.
Thank you. I mean, sorry, I come add to this. You know, one of the most narrated Shia hadiths is Sunni textbook. This is the most narrated, the most so-called tawatur, is the one to talk about some marital difference between Imam Ali and Hazrat Fatima. And maybe it's claimed that Imam Ali want to marry another person. And we believe, I think these are fabrication time of Muawiyah. And mostly it seems, because much of these hadiths, as you said, Abu Hurairah, are fabricated around at that time, which is connected to the question of the questioner. But one of the interesting things you said about Dr. Madelung, which really was a great scholar, you know, as you know better, that at the latter stage, he really was in the idea that the Prophet Muhammad wanted to designate it Hazrat Fatima as his successor. You know, it's not a Shi'i view, but he go to the Quranic view of the heirs and other stuff. So she become maybe beyond Imam Ali, attracted to the personality and position of Fatima. I mean, if you have any question at this point regarding this point, maybe I shouldn't interject, but if you say it, we were very thankful. Then I will ask you the next question. If you want to say about these latter views of Madelung, anything,
So Madelung's book on the succession to the Prophet is required reading for all our students because it is a very balanced historical report and he uses a number of important sources. But when I heard or read that he was beginning to speak about Lady Zainab as Lady Fatima as the possible successor of the Prophet, I thought perhaps he's now stepped outside of the bounds of academia, because there's nothing in any of the primary sources that would suggest this at all. He must be a man of real great age now, and I wondered if he hadn't perhaps stepped outside of the bounds of academics, because it's hard to imagine where he got this. But certainly in his book, he is very much in favor of Ali. Even grammatically, the famous phrase of man kuntu maulahu, even grammatically, the Arabic suggests al-mawla, zidafa. Al-mawla, that is not just mawla, it is the master or the chief. So that even grammatically, it seems as though the claim for Ali is the correct claim, but in history it just got buried. I mean, I did speak about the question of marital disputes because I challenged Lamans, because I think Lamans' Arabic wasn't good. I think he misinterpreted an Arabic word, and he did the same for Zainab. He insisted that Zainab's husband divorced her when she went to Karbala. No. The Arabic word doesn't mean divorce. I mean, it can, but it means she left the family home and went to Karbala. Doesn't mean that her husband divorced her. So he's quite extremist, and he was determined that Ali couldn't bear sleeping in the same house as Fatima. He would go and sleep in the masjid because she was angry with him, and then he extends these so-called marital disputes into the idea that Ali tried to marry again. But quite clearly, the Prophet said there's no way that was going to happen at all. And so, as you said, it was clearly a fabrication, a later fabrication.
Thank you very much. There is a question which ask about this is interesting, so maybe read English and then add one point to it. Thank you. The question asked, thank you so much for the great talk and the summary of your excellent book. My question is, have you found any similarity between Lady Fatima's martyrdom and Lady Mary's or Saint Mary's last days on earth? So that's an interesting question about Dormition. We, in Muslim culture, I mean, generally, we don't have much information how Lady Mary passed away or left this world. First, if you can educate us on that, and if there is some similarities in that part, because we have in Islam even the birth of Mary in Quran, which it is a proto-gospel of James. We don't have it in maybe in the accepted canonical gospels how Mary come to the world. But in Quran, we don't have how she left this world. What we know in Catholic theology is something about Dormition. So if you educated us on that, and also if you see somewhere similarities here or differences with Lady Fatima. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So in traditional Catholic theology, at the end of her life, Mary was assumed into heaven, lifted into heaven or taken into heaven by God. This is not a completely foreign idea in the Quran, in which God speaks to Isa and says, I am I think the word is mutawaffaq. I am the one who lifts you up. It doesn't mean death. It means lifts you or raises you up. And so in Catholic teaching, because she was this virgin mother of Jesus, God would not permit her to experience the corruption of the grave. This was purely a choice of God. He didn't have to do this. It was God's own choice. And therefore, at the moment of her death, he raised her to be with him in heaven. But then the question was, well, did she die? Because death in itself is a result of sin, and she has no sin. And there was this long debate in the church about Mary falling asleep, dormition, but not actually dying. But in fact, in recent years, Pope John Paul II especially said, Jesus himself in Catholic teaching died, was killed, died. Therefore, there's no reason why Mary couldn't share in that as well, that she would have suffered a normal death and would then be lifted up to God in heaven. So in terms of Mary and Fatima, there isn't a parallel, because we don't have any record of Mary suffering any sort of abuse towards the end of her life, and certainly not martyrdom. Whereas in the case of Lady Fatima, there is the abuse, the verbal, if you like, verbal abuse of having fadak removed from her, or withheld from her. So that is a form of injustice and therefore abuse. Then there is the physical abuse, which results in the miscarriage of her unborn son. We don't have any record in the case of Mary of that sort of suffering. Her suffering was more psychological and interior. And all we know is that at a particular moment, we don't know when, she died and God lifted her up to be with him.
Maybe I'll briefly add also, can you explain, was educating us, because we saw the similarities of Mary in Catholic theology and Hazrat Fatima in Shia theology. There is a difference of opinion about Mary in Protestant theology. And as you said, there are similar differences in Hazrat Fatima in Sunni theology. Because we were looking comparative theology, if you can explain briefly on these topics, I would be thankful too.
I think it's an exact parallel that in Sunni theology and piety, Lady Fatima is somewhat diminished in terms of all of those supernatural events and supernatural gifts given her by God, so that she becomes just an ordinary, very pious, devout Muslim woman, as you said, occasionally, as Denise Sufi said, occasionally raised up to sainthood, but generally diminished. And this is exactly the case of Mary in Protestant theology. So Protestant theology begins with the Reformation, with Martin Luther, who throws out a great deal of Catholic teaching, including the teaching on Mary. And she becomes in Protestant theology nothing more than the mother of Jesus and a good faithful woman, but without any supernatural qualities, without any gifts from God. And for us as Catholics, that's an illogical position, because she is the mother of Jesus, and because she herself in the Magnificat predicts every generation will call me blessed. So she herself predicts that she is going to have a status. And therefore there is a somewhat of a rift between Catholic and Protestant theology on her position and how we ask her to pray for us, intercede for us. Protestants generally would not ask Mary's intercession, whereas in Catholicism, it's an exceptionally important element of our spirituality that we ask Mary to pray for us, especially at the moment of death.
Thank you. Thank you very much for explaining. There is a question is asked like this. Are there any resources of the clothing and the hijab of Lady Fatima? And if her clothing is any similar to the black abaya that nowadays is attributed to her, or similar to the Lady Maryam's statues? Maybe I put the question, Otto, I think if you hear, I think you hear it, because there is a question about regarding covering and hijab and pushish, what is required for modest women. Very often, including myself, those who throw hijab say, look, hijab exists in other religions. Look to the nuns, for example, or look to the pictures of Lady Mary. Everywhere she's a full hijab. So I think this is the question this person is touching. First, the comparison with Lady Mary, or also, although, okay, from the other side of story is this, sometimes do we push it, the norms of dressing of maybe older times to the present times, which is not necessarily required of modesty, but a tradition. So we need to balance modest dressing. So I think you know the question. So if it's clear, I'll let you discuss it. Thank you very much.
I don't know anything specific about the hijab or the veiling of Lady Fatima. I know that as she approached death, she asked that she be completely covered. She did not want anyone to see her wasted form. But I always presumed, because I hadn't picked up anything particular in her life, that she lived modestly dressed, as was the custom of the Prophet's household. And therefore it stands out more specifically in the life of Lady Zainab, when the survivors of Karbala are deliberately unveiled as they are transported from the field of Karbala to Kufa as an insult, a further insult to all these women. So I presume that, like Lady Zainab, Lady Fatima wore hijab, or was covered in whatever way the family of the Prophet was covered. And I know it's a huge debate. It's a huge debate in Islam. I myself, as a somewhat conservative or traditional Catholic, I'm sorry that many nuns no longer wear the veil, because the veil was a very specific sign of God's presence in the community. Whenever you saw a veiled nun, you were reminded that you belonged to this family, and that God had made himself known and had called people to serve him. Now, many nuns, like many priests, they dress in civilian clothing and you don't know who they are, and that's a great pity. In terms of modesty, of course, I agree. I think that modesty is crucially important, but I am not an expert enough on the whole question of hijab as an Islamic tradition, and how it developed in terms of, does the Quran specifically mention hijab as veil, or does it mention hijab as something else? I'm not sure how the tradition, it's not an area of Islam that I know well, and I know that it's highly disputed. I know that there are many younger Islamic women who deliberately choose hijab. They defiantly say, I choose this, nobody forced me, I chose this. But I also know that there's, in the Western world, something of a kickback, but that's part of Western secular society. So in a country like France, for example, we see this quite clearly. It's part of secular society to remove any mention of God's presence, even in the way somebody dresses, from the marketplace, from the city. And yeah, this is a real problem. But I think immodesty, we have to say it, that immodesty has become a crucial problem in the West, because it has led to all kinds of social evils that I don't need to mention, that are rife. And I think that there are, social evils also in the Arabic Islamic world that are present, and they are there because you have people who are kicking against what God asks and kicking against the tradition of family and of faith. And as soon as people do that, all kinds of problems begin to arise, and those problems spread easily in society. Western society is rife with immorality. Despite the constant preaching of the Christian Church, of Islam, of Judaism, it's rife because people have chosen this, and they think it's bringing them happiness, but they're not happy. They lack joy. I mean, maybe they're happy, but happiness and joy are not the same thing. They lack joy. Joy is a much deeper thing. It comes from God. And they lack that, but they're convinced that they've found the meaning of life, and it's very hard to convince them otherwise. Yeah, it's a big issue. It's a big problem.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. There is a question. Actually, this is another domain of maybe similarity. The question says, exploring other interfaith connections in religious narrative, like Imam's direct and indirect dialogue with Christian, or the relationship between Imam Mahdi and the Prophet Isa. Can these connections offer other insight for our today conclusion? Why can it be more important? So maybe as I just 1 minute add that this is the other similarities or relationship between Shi'i Islam, especially Christianity, eschatology, end of times, Messiah, and the return of Jesus, and Imam Mahdi. And at least the Shia theology, strong belief is Imam Mahdi's mother is a prince from Byzantine and a descendant of either Peter the companion, apostle, disciple, or some other ones say maybe Peter the brother of Jesus, the one, the family of Jesus, one of the brothers. So if I'm not sure, maybe it will be the topic of our next book, inshallah, about the end of times about Mahdi. But any discussion, any point in this regard, we would very appreciate.
Well, this is quite an easy topic because, for one thing, we have a very, very long history of Catholic Shia dialogue. It's been going on for years, centered between Tehran and London and Rome. It's been going on for a long time. Very good theological dialogue. And the reason for that is because we've got lots of things in common, lots of analogies that can be made. Professor Amir Moetzi has just brought out a book about Ali, The Well-Guarded Secret. I think one of the points he missed is that in terms of the Jesus-Peter picture in the scriptures, that is, Jesus' immediate kind of right-hand man, the head of the apostles, was Peter. And for me, there's a relationship there of Ali and the Prophet. That I think that Ali was to the Prophet Muhammad in many ways what Peter was to Jesus, his immediate go-to person, his immediate, not successor in this case, but he's in Jesus' case, but the head of the apostles, and therefore the first leader of the church after the resurrection. And I think that's a very important issue. So already in the Jesus, Peter, Muhammad, Ali model, you have interesting parallels. Then, of course, you have Lady Mary and Lady Fatima, interesting parallels. But then, of course, there's eschatology, and Catholic eschatology is very similar to Islamic eschatology, although Islamic eschatology is more developed now. I think really since the creation of the State of Israel, there's been a rise in apocalyptic sort of writings and theology in Shi'i Islam, and especially a rise in eschatological studies and the return of the Mahdi, who will come bringing justice, accompanied by Isa, of course. So I was asked a few months ago if I would consider writing a biography about Nargis, the mother of the 12th Imam. Quite a difficult task because the sources are very few. There's hadith sources, but few historical sources. Nonetheless, it might be an interesting thing. And it's only recently that I heard that she is held to be a descendant of Peter. I didn't know that. That was something I heard just in the last few months. So again, eschatology is not a subject that I know exceptionally well, but I do understand that there is this unique link between Isa and the Mahdi coming at the end of times, coming to restore justice, coming to restore the world as the world should be. And so with a mother who is a Christian and with the accompaniment of the Mahdi by Jesus at the end of time, there you have an exceptionally strong link and parallel between specifically Shia Islam and Catholic eschatology. In Christian eschatology, there are very similar events as we read in Shia eschatology, a number of worldly cosmic events that are going to predict the end. And then finally, the return. In Christian theology, it's the return of Jesus. In Shia theology, it's the return of Al-Mahdi. But in both senses, they bring judgment and they bring justice. And this is what marks the end. Judgment of the world and of all in it, but also a restoration of justice to what was meant to be rather than what has occurred. And in the background, these powerful women making intercession on the day of justice. So I think there are lots of parallels. I think, you've got 12 imams and 12 apostles. That's a very interesting thing. And I know that the number 12 is a symbolic number, but it's just very interesting for me, these 12 and these 12, and then Peter, Jesus, the Prophet, and Ali. I think that the parallels are very strong. And you can look at these parallels without, again, merging them into one. They remain distinct, but I think they remain perfectly valid. Yeah.
Thank you. Regarding the Nargis Khatun, the mother of Mahdi, recently there are few articles published by a group, which is these are published in academic journals. They pick up the main hadith, which is what Sheikh Saduq. By the way, your book has excellent bibliography. You quoted them. It's so details, all the hadiths, centuries. So you're familiar, you're hadith scholar, I think, in that sense. They pick up I forgot which book of Sheikh Saduq but was a big hadith, a long hadith story, telling the story. So first is a story. You think whether it's a historical basis in it. They take it seriously and went to the Byzantine sources. They went to Turkey. They went to search the historical books, and luckily they were able gradually to pinpoint who that lady could be, the descendant of what big, because it must be a big person, Caesar, or the ruler, emperor, or the descendant of emperor, or close associate. Actually, they have published few articles successfully, and I read some of them. Really, they're good in the sense not about Shia story or something like that, about the Byzantine history. I think I tried to via Dr. Musalla, I send those articles to you. Maybe already you have seen them. Those are interesting. Maybe because they also have to learn many new things. Greek language, all the things. So that's an interesting topic. But so going to the next. Repeated. Okay, this is the fourth. It's about your book now. On the book, did Father Clohessy just narrated material in his book, or he has investigated and believe in them beyond that, just bring different hadiths in the book? I am not sure exactly what these things you judge it. Does belief mean I don't think means belief as a Shia Muslim, but you mean, did you do critical source, or maybe at least I put the question like that, but a source criticism?
I think it's more about what you said, Dr. Quddusi, just the resources and critical investigation, how valid the hadith is, for example. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a huge problem for any scholar of Islam in the West, the problem of hadith. The problem is because there are now numerous Western scholars of Islam who completely reject the hadith as a viable source. Basically, since the time of, Schacht, Joseph Schacht, and Goldzaya and others, they basically regard almost all the hadith as forgeries. Maybe some of the legal hadith, the ones that touch on legal issues, they accept those, but generally speaking, they regard the hadith as unacceptable as a source, which is why, as an aside, writing on Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas was so easy, because there's only, I think, 1 or 2 hadith about him. Almost all the other stuff is purely history, and so it's quite easy to write about him. But I got severely attacked by numerous scholars in the West on Lady Fatima book and the book on Zainab, because I used hadith, and they said, well, hadith are not reliable sources. Now, for one thing, I struggle to understand that, because in the Western world, when we study English ecclesiastical history, for example, we use very ancient texts, the history of Bede the Venerable, without question that it's a reliable source. And so I have an issue with the Western fixation with hadith as not acceptable. So that's one layer. Then there's a second problem, and that is that among the Shia, I discovered that there's dispute about hadith that they regard as valid and hadith that they regard as invalid. So obviously, if I'm using hadith from Al-Kafi, I feel quite secure that, that is the masterpiece of hadith. I feel quite secure that I'm on safe ground. But there were other texts that I found not transmitted by major hadith sources, but only by what I would call minor hadith sources, not one of the 4 books, but also not among any of the other major transmitters. And I understand that some of those can be quite problematic. But in the end, I'm trying to give people a taste of the position of Lady Fatima in Shia Islam. And I know that people piously read the hadith and understand the hadith as coming down through a long process. And even if some of the details might not always be exact, they form part of the oral tradition of what Shia Islam is today, in the same way that the Catholic Church has an oral tradition of stuff that was passed down from generation to generation. At times it became a little distorted and then it found its way back into orthodoxy. And I understand that as a person of faith, I accept that source. I accept that God guides it as it journeys. And I have no reason to have major doubts about the Shia or even the Sunni Hadith as a reliable source. I'm not a Shia, I'm not a Hadith scholar, but I don't simply accept that they're all forgeries. That for me is a nonsensical way for an academic to approach any text. A text is a text, and we have to judge it by its contents as well as by the transmitters who have brought it to us, as well as by its context. And every text can be judged in this way. The texts about the supernatural elements of Lady Fatima's life, even if they're rejected by some, there's, for example, the famous Ashbah, the famous series of hadith about the figures in paradise. Now, I know that there's scholars who reject those outright. Nonetheless, they speak about particular piety and understanding of the members of the Ahl Bayt that has been passed down from generation to generation. And I didn't feel that I had the authority just to leave it all out and say, well, I don't accept this. It's not for me to make that sort of judgment. In trying to present a wholesome, fulsome picture of this is the person of Lady Fatima, and these are some of the things that are held about her or said about her or believed about her. I think that's very important.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I have to testify that in some cases, at first, this is your approach to say what Shias believe. Kind of objectively, and I see, but occasionally you have some points, and maybe you added to that to third edition. Okay, look, guys, this hasn't come in coffee. The first time it's come, for example, at Basharat al-Mustafa or something like that. So I have to testify to that. Doctor, there is another question. Let me ask it. Please, people raise your hand and ask your question orally, because I think that's give more spirit to the question, meaning to question. Don't be shy. One person asking Farsi, thanking you and may God give a strength to you and a prayer for you. But then he says, okay, they're asking about the burial of Hazrat Fatima. I'm not sure it was in your book, maybe in the appendix. I didn't read it. So it says, the person asks, can you ask about it regarding the burial of Hazrat Fatima, why it was hidden, and then also they ask maybe regarding the burial of Imam Ali's grave, which initially was hidden, but then was disclosed. And then also that's the interesting thing. So also regarding Hazrat Lady Maryam. So in that sense, we don't. Maybe you explain do we have a grave for her, or we don't have a grave for her, or we don't. I know it was part of the last question about her. Also that comparison, because it's a curiosity why we don't have a shrine for Hazrat Lady Maryam. Two people visit, or maybe they called Kasisma Church. Maybe it was the first they did it. So if you explain this stuff, we would be thankful.
So traditionally, there's no grave for Mary. There's no place of her burial. We know nothing about the circumstances of her death. We know there are places where we think she lived, but including in Turkey, but no grave.
Okay.
And the same dispute, the same issue, really, I know this is quite problematic, but it arises with Lady Zainab. Where exactly is Lady Zainab buried? Because not everybody agrees that it's Damascus. Some people say Cairo, and there are some good arguments for it being in Cairo. Maybe Medina, no, but Cairo and Damascus kind of vie. I know popularly Damascus is the place, but I read some very early medieval Sufi texts insisting that she's buried in Cairo. Lady Fatima's burial was hurried and quick because she herself did not want present at her funeral rites those who'd insulted her father, those who'd usurped power, and so they were not even, I think, until later informed about her death, because she wanted only the members of the family and some of the smaller group of Ali's followers to be there. So she was the first one for whom a bier was made, which she would be carried in. She was constructed for her. Her body was covered up so that she couldn't be seen, and she was buried by night with only the immediate family present. And only the next day, I think, were people informed that she died, because she did not want them there. So she died having been ill-treated by the members of her father's own community, the very leadership of the community. And in a sense, no matter what else we say, her life was a sad life. She was badly treated, and you know, the only surviving daughter of the Prophet. And then, like Al-Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, you say, this is how the community treated these people, forgetting who they were. It's very interesting that when Lady Zainab appeared before Ibn Yazid, she walks in and he 3 times asks, who is that woman? And receives no answer. I think it's because she sat down without his permission, because she was quite tough, Lady Zainab. She really was quite tough. She sat down without his permission. 3 times this monstrous man demands, who is that woman sitting there? And finally, one of her servants says, it is Zainab, daughter of Fatima. Didn't say daughter of Ali. To remind Yazid who he was dealing with. You're dealing with a granddaughter of the Prophet of Islam. This is not just anybody. This is the offspring of Lady Fatima. And so I think that they were already, at the time of Karbala, there was a growing awareness of who this woman was, Lady Fatima, that she was really exceptionally important. But about her grave and her death, it's all quite sad, really. And of course, her grave now is lost to us, which is equally sad. And in fact, a great injustice against the community that these graves were destroyed.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Dr. Celine Ibrahim is with us. If she kindly open a microphone and say any comment, we're thankful because she's a respected author, scholar. Dr. Ibrahim, can you hear me? Dr. Musalla, you can communicate, Dr. Ibrahim.
Yeah, well, I mean, if she's around, I mean, if she's
okay.
available to say anything, but I put.
So you put a comment to her. I will ask a question if she can comment. I think we'll add to our meeting. Doctor or Father Clohessy, you know, one of the topic which is kind of you touched to it is the issue of redemptive suffering. You know, Mahmoud Ayoub, late Dr. Mahmoud Ayoub, I think was a pioneer in this field. Maybe you can also mention whether you familiar with his works, whether his works have affected you or not. He discussed, maybe he's the first one in regarding to Karbala, even Karbala, used the title of the redemptive suffering in Islam, which is a Catholic known phrase. If you can explain the virtues or meaning of suffering and a redemptive effect. And we know Dr. Ayoub also distinguished between, I think he mentioned 4 sufferings, and he says Christianity, at least in regard to Jesus, in believing what some Shi'i Islam different, and then you see it is there. For example, you know, in the Ashura Marasim, people do Latmiya or self-flagellation. We have in some Christian Catholic centers, for example, some people in the Philippines, in the day of Easter, they nail themselves on the cross. So I understand, you know, maybe some people say these are irrational, but I understand motivation. So if this issue of suffering and similarity differences, we would be thankful you do some discussion for us.
Good. So Mahmoud Ayoub's book, Redemptive Suffering in Islam, was the first book I read on Shi'i Islam, on a particular understanding of Shi'i Islam. And I was deeply moved by his book, and it has always held a place in my heart. But as I grow older, I am not necessarily entirely in agreement with his understanding. So the reason that this book is quite prominent at the moment is that I have a doctoral student in Tehran who has just finished his doctoral thesis, and I went to Tehran for the defense, critiquing this understanding about not suffering, but about redemption. Because of course there is no such thing in Islam really as redemption, and I think that what Ayoub has done is that he has used the word redemption in its very weakest sense, and not in the way that it is used in Christianity, because that's not possible. And that, in a sense, diminishes for me a little his argument, because he's had to give redemption a meaning that is the weakest possible meaning for that word. Nonetheless, I'm still quite moved by the idea, and in agreement with the idea that Al-Hussein deliberately giving up his life, because it was a choice he made. I mean, he knew it was foreordained, but I mean, he had a chance in a sense to get out of it, and he refused to. He deliberately allowing his life to be taken. That was a crucial moment for Islam. And in a sense, it redeemed Islam from the model of leadership it had had until then, and attempted to return it to the model of leadership provided by his own grandfather, the Prophet. I mean, it's a difficult thing because redemption has a very particular Christian baggage to it, and it's hard to move away from that. So I'm not saying in any sense that Al-Hussein is a savior or a redeemer. I'm saying that because of who he was, grandson of the Prophet, his standing before God as an imam, the fact that he willingly gave his life or allowed his life to be taken because he did not accept the model of leadership that was occurring at that moment in the house of Islam. I think that in a sense, that changed the course of history. It changed the course of Islamic history. It changed the direction that Islam was going, because it provided an alternative model which was closer to the model of the Prophet. And in a sense, that's a redeeming thing. It's a healing thing. Ayoub in his book describes redemption as healing through suffering. That's not quite what redemption really means. Redemption means buying something back. It comes from the marketplace of people buying back a slave or redeeming a slave. And so to talk about redemption as healing through suffering, that Islam in a sense was healed by the suffering of Hussein, it's a good idea, but it's not I'm sorry he used the word redemption. Wish he could have found another word that was more valid in the Islamic sense. Nonetheless, I highly respect him as an author. He's quite a puzzling person, because for a while he converted to Christianity, but not Catholicism, Protestantism. And I've never understood that, because his whole ethos is closer to Catholicism. If you read Redemptive Suffering, it could be written by a Catholic author. So I was never quite clear why for a while, because he then reverted back to Islam, why for a while he became a Protestant. I still regard him as a very good scholar, and his other books, his other writings on Islamic Christology, Jesus in Islam, are very important texts. And his book profoundly moved me, but as I grow older, I'm slightly doubtful of some of his theories, at least. Nonetheless, in Catholicism, as in Shi'i Islam, suffering is understood as part of the journey towards God. It is understood as part of human life, and I'm not sure that we have to go and look for it. Suffering will find us wherever we are, but that we can, in a sense, use our sufferings, to become better people, stronger people. But in Catholicism, there's a tradition that one could offer one's sufferings to God on behalf of others. So if I am going through a terrible suffering, I might offer to God my suffering, asking that he would use it in some way to bless someone else, or to bring grace to somebody else. This has been a long Catholic tradition, that we can use our sufferings to change our own lives, but also to ask God, I offer it freely to God, my life, my death, my suffering, and ask that he would use that in some way to bless others, however he's going to do that. This is a very strong Catholic piety. And I suspect that, in a sense, Al-Hussein offered his life to God, that God might use it to be a source of blessing for Islam, and a source of blessing for how Islam should be lived. And that in itself is a remarkable form of martyrdom.
Dr. Wadusi, sorry to interrupt you, but as you know, we have just a couple minutes, just that we stay on time. But yes, go ahead.
I haven't received any other question. So, Dr. Salim Ibrahim, I don't know if it's here, or anybody else, please raise your hand. Let me check again one more time. I don't see any hand is risen. So one thing, you said about suffering, and the books, we talk about the sorrows of the Lady of Sorrow is the title of Hazrat Maryam. House of Sorrow, House of Ahl Bayt is the house of Hazrat Fatima. So these, always you see even here why good people suffer, but it seems it's not exceptional, it's a really rule. Maybe even in Shia tradition, we have God who loves more, the one who loves more, God loves more, gives them more suffering, because it's like an engine of the spiritual growth. And the ones you wrote about them, Hazrat Zainab, Hazrat Abul Fadhl, even the Karbala, all shows suffering. So for growth, one thing I was interesting, maybe because we have short time, you kind of mentioned to us who in Islamic tradition, Shi'i tradition, you like. You look, as you said, Hazrat Fatima was a very positive role model for you, and then your devotion and love and respect. All the way I read the book, your book, I feel somebody's sympathetic. I don't see some looking down or arrogant, some secular scholar. Always you were sympathetic, even your point you raised, some you point raised. I don't think we have time to discuss them. But first, is any other personality in Islamic tradition attracts you, or reverse? As we Shi'i Muslims, as you said, martyrdom is important. Catholicism, much more in Catholicism, maybe the Protestant faith. Can you give us an example which you think inspiring Catholic tradition and could be interesting for us to, all heard, but since Francois Assisi, but anyone you think is a saint or one of the martyrs or fathers of the church, which you think inspire you and also could be attractive, we Shia Muslim, to look him as a great human role model?
Well, I have to start by saying that for the last 3 years of my life, I've been completely absorbed in the life of Al-Abbas, Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas. And one of the things that strikes me about him is that he is a perfect antidote to modern society, to the selfishness of modern society, because there was absolutely no ego in Al-Abbas. The reason it's so difficult to find out anything about him is because he deliberately hides behind Al-Hussein. He will not allow himself ever to take the prime role and the center stage. And so he spends his life obeying Al-Hussein's orders, going on dangerous missions to negotiate or to hold back the enemy or to find out the situation or finally to fetch water. And in all of this, and then finally literally giving his life so that he can get water to the women and the children. All of this for me strikes me as a model or an antidote to the selfishness of modern society, that this was a man who never ever thought about himself, but only about others, and was quite willing to hide behind the greatness and the holiness and the imama of Al-Hussein. Now, I think that in Catholic theological teachings, we've got plenty like this, especially we had certainly in the 20th century, in the 1900s, lots of saints who were martyrs, people who gave their life because they were fighting National Socialism, or they were fighting communism, or they were fighting one of the other terrible isms that so dominates our world. So we have plenty of modern martyrs who were willing to give up their own rights so that the rights of others could be respected. And I think that's a key, that there's still today people who know what their rights are, but they're willing to put their own rights aside so that the rights of others might be upheld and respected. For me, that is heroic. And whenever I see that happening, I rejoice that humankind is not nearly as bad as it looks. There are still great people from all of the faith denominations and even from outside of them who are still living lives that are noble and honest and just. And I think that for me, at this moment, Al-Abbas is a wonderful example of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We thank you for your presence. We end by this positive note. At least we have positive, optimistic view of humanity and the heroes of Allah. Thank you for you give Sunday afternoon for us. We really enjoyed, benefited. Dr. Masala, I let you end the meeting and you say the last word.
Well, thank you so much. It was all wonderful. I mean, the book, the lecture, the discussion, it was, I'm sure all of us will benefit from that. And we look forward to having you more, Dr. or Father Clohessy with us. Dr. Clohessy, he has been the half of my heart and the Karbala dreams, and then a forthcoming book on Abul Fadhl Al-Abbas ibn Ali. Inshallah, maybe we take that opportunity sometime in Muharram, maybe in a few months, we invite you again. And I need to thanks really for accepting our invitation.
So So thank you. It's been a great honor for me. As I said to you, I'm nothing more than a student of the Ahl Bayt. So I'm delighted always by these discussions and always happy to learn new things. And I hope that the book about Abul Fadhl will be out soon and that it will be a nice talking point. But I'm happy at any time to talk about Lady Zainab or to talk about the Salama and the dreams that took place, the visions took place in her house. Jibril visiting the Prophet to predict the death of Al-Hussein. I'm always happy to talk about any of these. So I'm always happy to join you whenever you would like me to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will be very beneficial. Dr. Quddusi, anything else to add? Yes.
No, thank you. First, Dr. Father Clohessy, you and our friends that attended this, some in different continents, maybe 2-3 continents. We are thankful. Everybody was very good, fruitful, and spirit-lifting discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Till next program, from wherever you're joining, either it is night, evening, or morning, or noon. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and till next time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.